So, so now it's started. So thank you so much, Nawar, to have accepted my interview request. So I'm just going to present you briefly for the people listening to this. Your full name is Nawar Alsaadi. Did I pronunciate it right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Perfect. So I know you since I read your first book, which was the Bulls of Heaven. I really loved it. It was like I read it like a novel. It goes from talking about Saddam Hussein and the life in Iraq in the 80s to the stock market, to activist investing. So it's quite an interesting book. And now you just published a new book about social media. It's a Stop the Clock, right?
It's a clock zero.
Clock zero. I'm not my social.
You were around the area.
So I downloaded it. Didn't have time yet to read it, but this is on my to read list.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions about that later on. But since it's not specifically about the stock market, I'm just going to ask you a few questions about your path as an investor.
Okay.
So my first question is how did you discover the stock market? Your parents were not working finance, so how did you start it?
Well, I mean, to find this out, you have to read the book again. But basically, the thing is, I've always had a certain interest in investing. I had an interest in business. My father was not in the stock market, but he had business interests. And I used to read the paper almost every day. My father would bring the paper, and I would read it, and I would look at these stock charts and these different prices changing, and then we had a satellite TV channel where we would get stock information and stock news, and I would just watch it out of curiosity, and I got pulled into this world because I figured this is where the money is. This is where this is the way to go if I wanted to be wealthy and successful and a businessman. So I kind of jumped into it myself and learned about it.
So you were reading the stock tickers from the newspaper when
Yes.
you were in Iraq, or in what market were you interested in?
No, that was in France. As you know, I moved to France when I was 12 years old, or I was stuck in France when I was 12 years old, and it was there where I met the stock market for the first time. But I was too young. I mean, my interest in the stock market, I think, started when I was maybe 16 or 17 years old, and that's when I bought my first stock. I was 17 at that time. Yeah.
So what was the first stock you bought?
It was Euro Disney, which is the theme park that was related to Disney, that was opened in Paris in 1992. And their stock was going down for a long time, and I guess I had it in me at that time to be a value investor of some sort, and I figured the stock came, I think, out at they did their IPO at 20 francs, and I think I bought them at 10 francs or something like that, and I put all my savings into it, and it didn't do very well, but ultimately after 7 or 8 months I was able to sell it at a profit. But that was not my I mean, that was just kind of dipping my toes into the waters. My real kind of interest in active investing started when I was 19.
Okay, and it's interesting that you said that you had it in you to be a value investor, because from reading the book, The Bulls of Heaven, it seems that you were doing pretty dangerous stuff, and you got super rich, then you got super poor. So can you drive me through the path that you went as an investor when you started?
Well, when I started trading or day trading properly, the proper term is day trading or swing trading as well. I did both of those. When I was 19, 20 years old. You have to keep in mind that we're talking about the late 90s. We're talking about the internet boom. We're talking about internet stocks doing very well. So I believe the internet was a big thing, that it will be a big thing, that a lot of money will be made out of the internet, and I wanted to get involved. So I started buying technology stocks, and I I didn't understand the concept of value investing very well, and I was kind of jumping from one company to another, looking for momentum, looking for earnings, looking for a buzz about a stock. But because at that time everything was going up, I did very well. I put half of my tuition money in the stock market, and by the time I graduated from university, I've had increased that amount. I multiplied it 20 or 30 times.
So how much money did you have at this time?
Well, I invested about $25,000, and by the time I graduated, I had $640,000.
Wow. And so, but you didn't say yet, like, how did you lose it all? Because
yeah, sure. Well, the bubble burst, and everything went down. One of the things that made my descent much faster than my rise is that I started using margin in the latter part of my trading, and so when I had $500,000 in my account, I could trade up to $2 million worth of stock. So you have to keep this in perspective. You have a guy who's like a kid who's 20, 21 years old, and he's day trading $2 million in and out of stocks, and thinking that trees going to go to the sky. And of course they don't, and then ultimately when the market collapsed, I lost everything, and I was down to $500 in my account.
So did you close your account at this point? Like, did you withdraw the $500?
Well, I mean, it didn't really matter. It was a technicality. I didn't have any more money, whether I closed it or not. I did keep the $500 there. But after that experience, I wanted to learn a little bit more about investing, and I started reading a lot of books about investors like George Soros and Buffett and Peter Lynch and people of that nature who have had a long track record, and I tried to learn from them. And I also read about entrepreneurs like Rockefeller and other Vanderbilt and others who were well known in the 19th and 20th centuries, who built big fortunes, because I wanted to understand business better. And then I kind of jumped again into the stock market about 3-4 years later. I saved enough money. I was working at the time for my father, and I was getting a salary in line with the other employees, and I was saving enough money, and then I jumped again in the stock market. And this time I stayed away from margin, but I went into option trading. I stayed within the technology realm, and I went into option trading, and that was a very similar kind of replay of what happened the first time. And I made a lot of money very quickly, and then I lost all of it very quickly as well. And I discovered the other thing not to do with investing, which is playing around with options.
Yeah. So basically, you were not buying on margin, but you were buying like leverage position where, like, if it goes up, you make much more money, but if it goes down, you lose much more.
And it was actually, in hindsight, it's clear that was even more dangerous in the sense that there was an expiration date. I mean, an option, becomes worthless at a certain date, and so you don't just have to predict or forecast the direction of the market or of a stock. You also have to time it right. And of course that it may work for a period of time, but ultimately things backfire, and it did backfire, and I lost again, and that was a very harsh loss, because actually harsher than the first one, because in the first one I always said, well, there was a big collapse, I was a beginner, I didn't know anything. Second time around was more complicated, because I blamed myself squarely for the loss, and it took me a while to recover. But what does not kill you makes you stronger, and ultimately I gave it a third try later.
Yeah, so that's why that's what is so interesting about your story, is that, like, you did all those mistakes, and then you've reached like a mastery, or like kind of you find your own voice as an investor, and you became like an activist investor, but not like the activist investor people know, like Carl Icahn, billionaires, and they can basically buy gigantic companies and do whatever they want. So, but like, you were a small investor, and you were able to basically fight with the Canadian company called Equal Energy.
Yes.
Memory is right. And
right.
That's so interesting, because as a small investor, it's so hard. Like, when you get those notices, it can vote for the board. You don't think that it can have any impact, because anyone's always elected, looks like +%.
Yeah.
So can you tell me, like, how did you turn yourself into an activist investor?
Well, I mean, the third time around, when I started investing a third time, I had a larger amount of capital. I've had a real estate that I sold and I put it into the market. It was an inheritance, but I was armed with the experience I've had before.
Is it important to ask how much money you had at this time, like, invest in the stock market?
The third time around, I started with about $500,000 or $600,000. So it was a large amount, and then I added to it a little bit more later. But my approach was fundamentally different. It was really not about the amount. It was really about the approach, in the sense I was looking for traditional industries, deeply valued stocks, non-leveraged positions. And I invested in those, and actually shortly after that involvement, the financial crisis started. So some of my capital went down. Thankfully, I was not fully invested, and I was able to capitalize on that, thinking that there were great bargains. Having learned from the previous 10 years before that the market is cyclical and things go up and down. And I made some astute investments that ultimately appreciated by 400, 500, 600%. And then I walked away with a fortune, just under $10 million. And that gave me the opportunity to be an activist investor. I mean, that was the next step for me, was not about making money just for the sake of making money. I wanted to do something a little bit more meaningful. And I thought I would push underperforming management teams to improve. And there was a company called Equal Energy that was very badly managed, that had a lot of valuable assets, but the management team and the board were running it to the ground. And I took a stance, and I put basically all my capital, every penny I had, I put it in this. I actually borrowed on top of it from my credit line, just to buy 5% of the company. But having said that, my activism process started before I bought that large position. My activism process was very unique. It was not done before in Canada or I think anywhere else. I was using YouTube. I was using message boards. I was using Seeking Alpha. I was writing articles. I was approaching smaller investors. And I was pushing the management through a digital campaign to change. And that process took about a year of pressure. I think I wrote at least 12 or 13 articles. I've contacted hundreds of investors. I called institutional investors. I talked to private investors, and I did some viral videos, kind of mocking the management, pushing the management to do things. Some of them were funny, some of them were serious. And it was an interesting process, but and then I backed it up by buying 5% of the stock.
But just so people understand that are listening to this and that don't have $10 million
Sure.
in the stock market, there are, like, when you go to a website of a company you invested in, there's like a phone number for the investors relation, and if you're lucky, like someone at the investors. Like, sometimes there's someone in charge of investors relation, and is going to answer the question. He's not going to give you any private information, but he have to kind of answer you. But like what you did is that you actually were able to talk to the CEO and have kind of an impact on the management. So do you think, like, anyone can basically call this number and say, I want to talk to the CEO, I want this change? Like, do you think that someone that is not rich, that don't hold a sizable portion of a company can actually be heard?
Well, there are two ways you can influence a management team. Either you have a lot of money and you buy a large position, and and once you buy that position and exceed the minimum, the legal threshold to file, then you file with the Security and Exchange Commission, or you file with the Canadian Securities Service, and then you show them that you are an owner. Now, that option is available to large investors, and once you do this, then they have to take your call. Now, if you don't have that option, and most people don't have that option, you have the second option, which is this option is accessible to everybody, is to make yourself an influencer in a way about the company. And to be an influencer about a certain company, you have to be proactively talking about it, a bit like a journalist. You have to argue your case, or you can think about it like a political campaign. You have to argue your case. You have to bring the shareholder base to you and make the company understand that you are talking in a way, indirectly on behalf of the shareholders, and then they would listen to you, because in a way you become an influencer, or they would call it an agitator maybe. But you have to show them there is a way for you to push back. You may not own the shares, but you maybe in a way you control the public opinion about the company. And that requires an engagement and a program and a campaign, but it's doable and does not require a lot of money. I mean, all my activism that did, all the work I did as an activist, most of it was done from my home office. I mean, I didn't need to hire professionals and PR professionals and lawyers. A lot of it was just hard work, and anybody can do it. Now, you mentioned talking and calling the company. I think anybody can call a company. And one thing investors need to know, that the company doesn't know how many shares you own. They are as blind as anybody else, because most shares that are traded under the name of the broker. So they don't know who owns what. So you can call and say, okay, I have a sizable investment. I have a large investment. And that's it. You keep it at that. The point is, you want them to, some executive will not take your call if you tell them, I have only 100 shares. We don't have to disclose this 100 shares. You just say, I have a large investment. Maybe it's large to you, but you could say it's a large investment. And as long as you handle yourself well, and then you explain your case. I mean, you cannot just call, for example, and whine about something. You have to show a certain understanding of what's wrong and how you want it to be corrected. So I think it's doable, but like anything in life, requires some commitment, some hard work, some persistence, and you will be heard. I assure you, will be heard. And there are a lot of shareholders who will support you once they know you're doing something.
And since we last talked about the previous book, what have you done? I know you wrote a book. So are you a full-time investor? Are you a writer? So what's your
well, I've done some activism beyond equal energy, with mostly with energy-related names. Some of that activism is soft activism, which is behind the scenes, that I start to push beyond the scenes. There was an oil company, which I will not disclose the name, but I bought a large position in it. And the CEO, without me knowing, he bought actually my first book, The Bull of Heaven. And he read it, and he emailed me, said, I'm very glad you are supporting us. So he knew that I had certain background, and I could, in a way, agitate against the company if they don't do the right thing. So I call this soft activism. Is you get involved, you tell them I'm here, I'm watching, I have a large investment, keep doing the right thing. And most, there are a lot of good not every executive needs to be punished. I mean, there are good, hardworking people, and you can work with them without having a public spectacle about it. So I do that once in a while, but I am personally, on a personal level, transitioning more and more toward writing. I've published 5 books, and I've recently published Clock Zero, and I tend to publish more books down the line.
So you published 5 books?
In total, yes, including The Bull of Heaven, yes.
Oh, so I need to download the other ones I missed. But so last question, like, why did you read a book about social media? What's the, like? It seems that it's against social media, and you use so much social media to be heard as an activist investor. So why don't you like them?
Well, yeah, I mean, the book in question is this one. It's the Clock Zero, I'm Not My Social Feed. The book uses...
on Amazon. Seriously, this guy's a good writer, so like you need to go to Amazon and buy it.
Well, thank you for the plug, but just kind of answer your question quickly. I do believe, I think everything could be bad for you if it is used excessively. So I think social media can be nefarious to people's daily life and life overall if they use it too much. So I wrote a novel that talks about a millennial in his late 20s who's trying to find some meaning and value in his life, and he's wasting his time chasing likes on Instagram, on Facebook, and things like that. And he gets talked into leading a rebellion against social media. And so he has this kind of crazy plan to eradicate social media from the planet. And it's a bit like a thriller, but a satire comedy as well, showing everybody how our life has been manipulated in a way by social media companies, and how a lot of people have been turned into drug addicts using this thing every day, getting their dopamine release, and not doing other more productive things. I mean, you can do productive things, maybe like activism with social media, but you could also waste your time scrolling and liking, and end of the day, you've not learned anything. But I can assure you, somebody has benefited from your behavior. It's the social media companies. They sold you a lot of ads because you're using their platform, because these are businesses. They're not here to help you. So you have to be smart about using them. But the book is not preachy. It's just a nice, fun book to read, and it has the social media as a background.
So if I understand you well, you're not investing in Facebook or Twitter?
No. I mean, I think Twitter as an investment had been a bad one. Facebook has been a good investment for people, but no, I mean, out of principle, I don't think it's ethical for me to bash these companies in my books and make money out of them. I've not done this before as an investor, and I will not do this now as a writer.
Okay, so thank you so much, Nawar. It was a real pleasure having the chance to talk to you again.
Thank you, Julien. Thank you for the invite, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.